Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to run this masterclass for you. As it says on the screen, this is a negotiation masterclass, and we're really going to be looking at 5 steps to brilliant negotiation. I'll give you a bit of context and then we'll get straight into it, because I really wanted today to be practical. I didn't want you to just get a lecture from me. What I wanted you to get was some tools that you can actually take away and start using no matter what you're negotiating. So in terms of some introduction from me, I'm Natalie Reynolds. I'm the founder and CEO of a negotiation consultancy called advantageSPRING. Prior to that, I was a barrister and a commercial director, various different things. I'm the founder of a project with the UN called Make Your Ask. Our aim is to get 1 million vulnerable women at the negotiating table, because all the research tells us that when we have diversity in negotiation, we get better outcomes. I'm the author of a book, We Have a Deal, which you can probably see in the background, and I'm also visiting professor of negotiation at Cass Business School here in London. So my husband routinely calls me a negotiation geek. I think that's a pretty accurate description, actually. Couple of things before we kick off. So over the last decade of running advantageSPRING, we've worked with all sorts of different businesses in all different parts of the world. And what I wanted to say is that, look, I'm sure you're all from different backgrounds and do different things. What I don't want you to think that today is going to be is me giving very specific, detailed technical advice about the types of negotiation you might be doing. The point of the session is really to draw on negotiation best practice, insight, psychology from a range of different environments. And you can see that we work with people like the World Bank, Shell, Rolls-Royce, but we also work with people like the dating app Bumble. And what I would stress is that I can tell you that the people at the World Bank, they are negotiating slightly different things to what the team at Bumble are negotiating. But what's important is that no matter who we are and what we're negotiating, as human beings, we tend to respond and react in the same way when we are doing it. And that is what is important. Also, just to say that the 5-step method that I'm going to be teaching you today, the deals method, is one that I developed back in 2013 to act as a bit of a pushback and the antithesis to a lot of very aggressive negotiation styles that were out there in the market at the time. This 5-step method that you're going to be introduced to today is exactly what I teach to the MBA students at the University of Oxford, Cambridge, London Business School, the LSE. And the reason a lot of these business schools have picked it up is because what you're going to see is that this method is really simple. You don't need a complicated manual. You don't need loads of really difficult kind of theories to master. This is really all about you having certain steps in your head that you can apply no matter what type of negotiation you are doing. So if you thought that today, and by the way, I don't think that you really thought this, but if you thought that today was going to be a lesson in how to pull on the boxing gloves, I do have to say to you that unfortunately it's not going to be that. Back in 2010, I was headhunted by one of the world's biggest negotiation training firms, and I worked with them for a couple of years before leaving on a point of principle. And that point of principle was twofold. So firstly, the style of negotiation that this company was teaching people was very old school. It was that kind of bang your fist on the table, you know, shout down the opposition, pull on the boxing gloves. And that to me just wasn't credible. The other point of principle I left on was they were very fond of kind of perpetuating stereotypes about women as negotiators. And that, again, that just didn't sit well with me. So if any of you are interested in some of the work I do on dismantling the stereotypes about both men and women as negotiators, please do drop me a line at the end. I'm more than happy to share that with you. But to make the point, I totally get that sometimes we are negotiating tough issues, complex issues, and sometimes our negotiations are tough. That doesn't mean we have to revert to being rude or aggressive. I think there's a difference between being rude and assertive, and there's a difference between being aggressive and firm. And I think as negotiators, we need to walk that line intelligently. So what are we going to cover today? So firstly, just as a bit of a kind of a comfort, hopefully, final slide of the deck are going to be my contact details that hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. But if we run out of time or there's something that springs to mind after the session, please do just drop me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'll be very, very happy to help you with any questions. But what we're going to cover today is a little bit of an intro to negotiation. We're going to explore some common mistakes made by negotiators, and then we're going to delve into the 5 steps of brilliant negotiation, so the deals method. And if we've got time, I'm going to share 5 little top tips about negotiating virtually as well. So let's start with a fairly bold catch-all statement, and one that I absolutely believe to be true, and it's this: that negotiation is the most important skill in business and in life to get what you want, need, and deserve. And quite frankly, we are doing it all the time. We just don't always realize that we could be doing it, should be doing it, or sometimes that we are indeed even doing it. And of course, we negotiate at work, we negotiate at home, we negotiate with suppliers, we negotiate with clients, we negotiate with our children, we negotiate with our partner. It's never ending. And of course, negotiations can look very different. So a negotiation might be a few people having a conversation over a coffee. It might be a telephone call with someone on the other side of the world. It might be an email going back and forth to someone in another location. Or it might be that very traditional style of negotiation that we tend to all think of, which is multiple parties round a big table thrashing out a deal. Now, of course, in the current climate with restrictions and social distancing, it's far more likely that you are going to be engaging in the phone and email and WebEx type negotiations. And hopefully we'll have time to do those top tips on that. But just to stress, these are all negotiations. They are all valid. And actually the 5 steps that I'm going to share with you will apply to all of these equally. So to be clear, when I talk about negotiation today, I am talking about it in its broadest sense. I'm basically saying that negotiation is any situation in which you are seeking a yes, where you are getting someone to agree with what it is that you are actively looking for. It's basically any important conversation. Now, a very important point. I'm very fond of saying this: the spreadsheet will only take you so far. And that is because we don't always make decisions or negotiate from a position of fact or logic. Now, what I'm talking about here is what I believe to be probably the most important part of negotiation, which is the psychology of negotiation. Why we do what we do, why we respond in the way that we do when we are negotiating, when we are told no or when we are told yes. And it's really important that we understand that, yes, we should do the research. So crunch the numbers, work out the percentages, have all the regulations in front of us. Of course, we should do that. But actually, the outcomes of our negotiation are not just driven by the numbers and the percentages. They're also driven by how things interact with each other, our biases, our fears, our stereotyping, our ambitions, our hopes. We bring ourselves to every negotiation that we do. Now, some people, particularly very technical and logical people, find that concept very difficult to grapple with, because their view is well, no, actually, I'm not an emotional person. It's about business. Business is business. It's not about me. I think the best negotiators and the best business people recognize that, we're not robots. We are humans. And therefore, we bring ourselves to every negotiation, but so do they. And there's a wealth of research and insight into the psychology of negotiation, some of which we are going to touch on today. But just bear this in mind. I could have prepped all the numbers, all the percentages, worked out a sliding scale of what this means for my P&L. I could have done all of that. But if I can't deal with the person who looks me in the eye, refuses to move and intimidates me, all of a sudden that research becomes far less useful. But it works the other way as well. You can't just rely on your people skills to get you through. You might be fantastic at building rapport. You might be really good at building relationships with people. But if you've not bothered to crunch the numbers and know your variables inside out, again, you make yourself vulnerable. So what we're going to do now, before we get into the 5 steps of brilliant negotiation, is I'm going to talk very briefly about common mistakes made by negotiators. Now, in my book, and by the way, my book was deliberately written in such a way that it was meant to be very accessible. Traditionally, there's been two types of negotiation book on the market. So one is the very academic type. So the ones that come out of, say, the Harvard program on negotiation, like Getting to Yes, things like that. Brilliant books. But a lot of these very theory heavy academic books can sometimes be quite alienating to people. So there's those books. The other books that were on the market back when I wrote my book were all hostage negotiation books. And don't get me wrong, they're brilliant, they're interesting, they're glamorous, they're a good read. But I do believe that if every negotiation you are doing at work feels like a hostage negotiation, well, then something's not really going right, in my opinion. So my book was very much written to be a simple guide to negotiation, relevant for anyone. If you're a stay-at-home parent or a CEO, you should be able to find some guidance in my book. And the book's in two parts: what to do and what not to do. Okay, and that's basically what we're going to be doing today. So the what not to do part of my book is a list of 20 different mistakes that are made by negotiators, regardless of industry, regardless of geography, and most importantly, regardless of experience. Now, we don't have time to go through all 20 today, but what I am going to do is share with you the 3 most common mistakes that are made by negotiators. And in fact, these mistakes are so prevalent that you can almost view them as types of negotiator in themselves. So actually what I'm going to do now is, just over the next 5 minutes, is share with you 3 types of negotiator that you should not want to be. But if you're really honest with yourself, you will recognize yourself in at least one of them. I know I do. And actually, if you're really, really honest with yourself, you might recognize yourself in all 3 at different points in time. And there is nothing wrong with that, because actually, you know, I've had the luxury over the last decade of working with some of the world's best negotiators in politics, diplomacy, business. The reality is that the best, most experienced negotiators only get to that point because they realize that they're making these mistakes, so they can go ahead and try and deal with it in advance. So this isn't about bringing you down. This is about empowering you to see, oh, actually, yeah, I do that. Maybe I need to stop doing that in the future. Okay, so introducing the negotiators you do not want to be. Which one are you? So the 3 negotiators that you shouldn't want to be are the avoider, the giver, and the fighter. And we are going to take each of those in turn. So let's start first of all with the most common of the negotiators you don't want to be. And that is the avoider. And as the name suggests, that's someone who will either go to great lengths to avoid negotiation completely, or once they're in a negotiation, they will desperately speed it up so they can end it. Now, there are multiple reasons why people avoid negotiation, many more than the 3 on the screen, but these are just 3 that illustrate the point somewhat. So why do people avoid negotiation? Well, some people avoid it because, quite frankly, they don't like how it makes them feel. It makes them feel uncomfortable, awkward, embarrassed, frustrated. And so they avoid it because they just don't want to feel like that. Some people avoid negotiation because they assume they know already what the outcome is going to be. So if you are negotiating the same kind of issues with the same kind of variables, with the same kind of people all the time, I think we all know it can become very tempting to think, well, they're going to open here, I'm going to open there, they're going to move on this, I'm going to move on that, they'll escalate, we'll come back, they'll concede, we'll concede, and then we'll meet in the middle, because that's what we always do. So why don't we just save time and meet in the middle? So of course we see that a lot, but of course we're always cautioning people and saying, look, you know, just because something was agreed last time round, it doesn't mean that now there might be potential for something else. And how true is that now, given the climate we're operating in? You know, what someone will have agreed to 6 months ago might now be very different. They might now be willing to pay more to get something quicker. They might now be willing to pay more to have a lower risk profile on the project. You know, there could be any number of reasons. And our job as negotiators is always to be exploring what might be possible. That's what negotiation is. It's the act of exploring what could be possible. And then finally, a lot of people avoid negotiation for relationship preservation. And God, this is true at work and at home, isn't it? You know, so at home, I know I will often avoid difficult conversations with my husband because I just don't want to have a row. I just want a quiet life. So I'll avoid the difficult negotiation we've got to have about childcare or school drop off or tidying the house. I'll avoid that because I just want an easy life. Now, this is true commercially as well. And, you know, I'll give you an example from my world. You know, I've spent the last 10 years running a business, growing a business, trying to keep clients, trying to acquire new ones. And there are some clients, aren't there, who are kind of, you know, real status clients that maybe you've wanted to work with your whole career, and yet you know that you're maybe doing too much work for not enough reward, and you know you've got to go and talk to them about maybe your fees or your rates. But there's also a little voice in your head that's saying, you know, if you annoy them or irritate them, they might just go and work with competitor X, because we know that they'll do it cheaper. And so often, to preserve the relationship, to keep life easy, we'll avoid the difficult negotiation. Now, there are lots of reasons why we shouldn't avoid negotiation and why we shouldn't be avoiders, not least the fact that negotiation is a fundamental part of what it is to be a human being. Negotiation is how human beings have solved problems, dealt with conflict, and reached agreement since the dawn of time. It's how friendships work, marriages survive, communities coexist, and business gets done. We can't pretend it's not there. And what we also need to recognize is what it says on the screen. If something is too easy, we will start to wonder why. Maybe not immediately, but we will eventually. And what I'm talking about here is this really common mistake that people make. They think to themselves, well, look, I really value this client. I really want them to like me. And actually, I know that they want this thing here. So I'll just give it to them, because then they'll be grateful. I've not wasted their time. They'll, you know, and the relationship will be improved as a result. Now, I think we all know that if you hand something to someone on a plate, or you give them loads of freebies, the reality is they will start to wonder why. They'll wonder why you're doing it. What more could they have got? What are you trying to hide? You know, people say never look a gift horse in the mouth, but we always do. We always start to question, why have they done that? And it's really interesting that, you know, a lot of people will hand their client or their supplier or whoever, they'll give them what they want and make it nice and easy for them. They'll avoid negotiating on that point. And initially, the other side might be really grateful and really happy. But all the evidence tells us is that that happiness will so often just kind of slowly evolve over time into a little bit of disbelief, a little bit of resentment, a little bit of, hang on a minute, why are they trying to pull the wool over my eyes? Now, there is a very dangerous phase at the end of every negotiation. I call it post-handshake, pre-paperwork. Okay. And it's basically that phase where maybe you and I have gone for a coffee, we've thrashed out a deal pretty much, we've shook hands. We then go back to our respective offices to draw up the contracts. That has been proven to be the most dangerous phase for any deal, because that's when we start to sit back and reflect on the conversation. Who said what? When did they say it? Could I have got more? Should I have given them more? And we start to analyze it. Now, we've done research at CAS that actually says that whilst that post-handshake, pre-paperwork phase is where most deals fall down, if actually in the run-up to the handshake, it was all too easy, failure in that latter stage is then all the more likely. So the reality is don't avoid negotiation. As human beings, we expect it. We expect to be able to play a role in our future. And if someone kind of prevents us from doing that, inevitably doubt will kick in and the deal may well be vulnerable. Okay, next up is the giver. I think we can all recognize the giver. The giver is the person who, in their desperation to get an agreement on one element that's really important to them, ends up giving away a whole load of other elements to make sure that they get the deal they want. So freebies, right? So again, let's imagine I'm talking to a big client, big corporate client, and I'm really obsessed with securing a certain price for my training. And I really want that price because I've been told that, you know, if I routinely get that price, then I'll get my bonus. So I go into the negotiation and I go after this price really hard. And in trying to get that price, I give them, you know, I give them my best people on the job, a speedier turnaround time, preferential payment terms, access to IP. And at the end of the intervention, I get that price I wanted. But the cost or impact of all the things I'm giving away completely erodes the value of that price. That deal holistically is not good for me. What we need to remember, of course, is that freebies have a cost, and that cost can very quickly add up. Always be aware of the impact of your concessions. And a very simple way to stop being a giver is to use a phrase that you are probably using already. And that phrase is if you, then I. Now, if you, then I is without a doubt probably the most powerful phrase in negotiation. It's what all the world's best negotiators use. And as I said, you're probably doing it already in your personal life. Because in our personal negotiations, we tend to use that kind of language all the time. So I'll say to my husband, Chris, If you walk the dogs, I'll get dinner ready. If you go to the supermarket, I'll tidy the kids' bedrooms. On a night out, I might have said to him, you know, if you pay for the taxi back, I'll get this round of drinks in. You might say to a neighbour, if you can sign for my Amazon parcel, then I'll bring your bins in when you go on holiday. Dull, boring, mundane trades, but trades nonetheless. And trading is what makes the world go round in a way that is equitable. Every time you negotiate anything, you always need to make sure if you're giving something, you get something back in return. Now, of course, this strategy can only work if you have understood your counterpart. Because if you try and incentivize them with something they couldn't care less about, that only leads to further resentment. Now, you might think that's really obvious, but over the years, I've observed many negotiators, many big businesses particularly, trying to incentivize the other side with things that the other side I could not care less about. We'll touch on this as we go through the 5 steps of brilliant negotiation shortly. And then finally, the negotiator that so many of us claim we are not, but we often end up being without realizing it. And this is the fighter. Very simply, the fighter views every negotiation as a battle or a competition, whether they realize it or not. And of course, in battles and competitions, there tend to be winners and there tend to be losers. And in my experience, no one wants to fall into the latter category. Now, of course, you should try and win. You should always try and get the best deal you can. You should be ambitious. You should strive for the best. But I do believe there is a difference between winning at all costs and winning in the right way. Now, the very simple point I want you to take away is that sometimes in our quest to win and get what our boss wants us to get or whatever, we don't think enough about how the other person feels at the end. And, you know, it's not that we have to be kind of, you know, celebrating our victory in their face and going, yes, you know, once we shake hands. But sometimes we don't spend enough time kind of reassuring the other side that this is a good deal for everyone, that, you know, and on a more extreme level, you know, if you behave badly in a negotiation and you intimidate the other side, you undermine them, you frustrate them, you make them feel small, they're always going to remember that about you. And human beings have very long memories. We bear grudges. And if someone treats you badly, that will have a knock-on effect on how they go on to engage with you in the future, whether they like to admit it or not. We all do it. So what we need to be thinking to ourselves is, do I ever need to engage with this person again? Are they likely to shape my future in some way? Does my reputation matter to me? If any of those are a yes, you need to think about, how do I conduct myself at the end of this negotiation? Okay, so for the next kind of 10 minutes or so, we are going to look at how to negotiate brilliantly. So we've talked about what negotiation is. We've explored 3 types of negotiator you shouldn't want to be. And now we're going to look at how to negotiate brilliantly. So this is the 5 steps of brilliant negotiation. Or to think of it another way, this next section is called how to get people to say yes. So the 5-step method, and you are going to get access to some follow-up materials on this. This deals method, though, is very simple. This slide would be enough to remember it. I basically came up with this as a way of saying to people, look, it doesn't matter who you are, how complex your deal is. If you follow these steps, it's going to help you. And this method takes you right from long before the negotiation starts, right through to post handshake. So discover, establish, ask, lead, and seal. Those are the 5 stages of brilliant negotiation. And the point is that you should be able to store that in your head. You can recall those steps at any point in time. Now, initially in a negotiation, you will go through those 5 steps in a very linear fashion. You will do your discovery, you'll establish some certainty, you'll ask for what you want, you'll take the lead in the negotiation, and hopefully you'll seal the deal. But bear in mind, of course, over an extended negotiation, you may go up and down this list as things change or people move on or whatever. The other thing I would say is, of course, is yes, seal is the final part, but seal also means sealing the deal in the longer term, because of course, you know, sometimes the most challenging negotiations happen post-agreement. So you might negotiate with a client to do a piece of work with them, but actually once you've started that piece of work, there are then ongoing negotiations with the client about quality, change of personnel, whatever else. So this is a useful model, but remember, you might move up and down it over the course of longer negotiations. So let's take each of these 5 steps in turn. So let's start with D for discover. And what we're basically saying with discover is long before you get anywhere near that negotiation, you should discover absolutely everything that might influence the outcome. So this is about going beyond the obvious. Yes, you need to discover who's your counterpart, who do they work for, what are the variables. Obviously you do. But you also need to discover all the stuff around the edges that might influence the deal. So what's going on politically, economically, reputationally for the parties? You know, you might find out, for example, that their CEO has just been fired because of a scandal. What might that mean for the negotiation? You may in your research discover that actually the person you're negotiating is actually moving on next month. What might that mean for what you can get them to agree to? You know, it's about understanding the bigger picture. I had a whole load of activity last year working with clients who were being really impacted by the political unrest in Hong Kong that was happening at the time. Now, what was basically going on is that they were negotiating with people in the States about contracts for delivery of products. And whilst their negotiations with the guys in the US weren't really anything to do with the political unrest in Hong Kong, the knock-on effect further back down the supply chain meant that suppliers of suppliers of suppliers of suppliers were being impacted by what was happening in Hong Kong. So actually their negotiations with people all the way over here were being impacted by events all the way over there. It's that kind of thing, okay? So a really kind of global look, holistic look at what might the issues be. Now, at the discovery phase, I'm sharing with you now my three most important questions in the negotiation process. The three questions that I will come back to multiple times throughout the negotiation process are: who are they? What do they want? Why do they want it? And these questions are brilliant because it just always brings us back to basics. Who are we really negotiating with? Do we really know what they want, or are we just assuming? And why do they want it? Well, they may have wanted it for that reason last time around, but what about this reason this time around? Now, I will, as I said, I will come back to these questions multiple times just to ground me, just to make sure I'm clear, I'm not making assumptions. But the reason I'm laboring this now is because actually our brain plays tricks on us when we negotiate. So we'll often start the process asking these questions, but then our brain will flip these questions into: who am I? What do I want? Why do I want it? And of course, they're utterly valid questions as well. But actually, it's just as important that through the negotiation process, we are really quite clear on all of these things. Who are they? What do they want? Why do they want it? And keep coming back to those. Okay, next up is E for establish. And the establish phase of the negotiation process is basically about taking all of that discovery and refining it down into some usable boundaries. So you need to establish things like: where is it going to take place? When is it going to take place? Who is going to play what role? What escalation procedures are you putting in place? What risk can you swallow? What currency will you do this in? It's certainty. It's also about establishing roles. So, you know, in your organization, in your negotiation team, who's going to take the lead on making proposals? Who's going to take the lead on recording proposals? Who's going to, you know, or just doing it all yourself if it's just you. It's also about establishing some discipline. Because if there are a number of you on a negotiating team, you have to ensure that everyone is clear about what's our messaging, what won't we say, what's our walk away point. Because I've lost count of the amount of clients I've worked with where the reason the negotiation has gone wrong is not because of something the other side did. It's because they were actually contradicting each other and being, you know, shooting each other in the foot, so to speak. So make sure you establish that discipline as well. Now, the other thing that I think it's really important is to do is prior to the negotiation, establish where you might be able to go in that negotiation. Now, what you can see on the screen is called my possibilities plotter. This is in the book. It's also something that I teach to all my clients all over the world, regardless of who they are. And this possibilities plotter is kind of like a one-stop shop, really, for the potential in that negotiation. So it's split into take triangles and give triangles. Now, of course, in a negotiation, some of the issues will be takes, things you want from them, but some will be gives, things you can do for them. And all you do is you populate the triangles with the takes, the variables that matter to you, and the gives, the variables that matter to them. And then on the take triangles, the thick end of the take triangle represents what your opening position is going to be. So what are you going to start by asking for? Whereas the thin end of the take triangle represents your worst case scenario on that issue. So for example, on rate, I'm going to start ambitiously by asking for £100, but I know the minimum I could accept is 75. And then between those points, I'm just populating little steps that I might make between those boundaries. Now, the give triangles work the other way around. So you start at the thin end of the give triangle with what you're going to start by offering them. And then the thick end of the give triangle represents the most you could ever give them. Now, you do it that way around, of course, for gives, because you shouldn't give away everything up front, because if you do, you've then got nowhere to go. Now, a quick note on this, that actually, when I talk about opening ambitiously, you do need to make sure you open ambitiously but credibly. And opening ambitiously is quite simply asking for a little bit more than you ultimately need, or offering a little bit less than you can ultimately give. And the reason we do that is so we've got room to maneuver and space to explore what could be possible. But you'll note I said open ambitiously but credibly just now. Now, opening ambitiously, it's a delicate balance, because you should open ambitiously. And by the way, they will be doing it to you, so don't feel bad about it. Open ambitiously, but do it credibly, because if you open too ambitiously that you lack credibility, you might hit something called, and excuse my language, the piss off point. And the piss off point is where you've opened so ambitiously, you lack credibility, you irritate the other side, and that will then ruin the whole negotiation, potentially. Okay, so just something to think about. Okay, next up is A for ask. And this is everything to do with the development of, the receiving of, and the making of proposals, or asking for what you want. Now, I could talk about lots of things here. I would say this: plan multiple proposals in advance. Too many of us plan our opening proposal. We have a rough idea of where we want to get to, and then no clue as to how to bridge the gap. Okay, plan multiple proposals in advance, have them down in front of you so that if you need to, you've already got a route map to a solution in front of you. Okay, that's what the best negotiators do. But what I actually want to talk to you about is this: anchoring, or the question of who should go first. And this is probably the question I get asked more than any other in negotiation. Who should make the first proposal? Who should go first? Now, I would say that 9 people out of 10 have a belief that they want the other side to go first. And when I ask them why, they will say, because I want to hear what they might be willing to give me. Now, there is a fundamental flaw with that mindset, and it's very simple. It relates actually to the universal truth of negotiation, which is what I call it, the universal truth of negotiation. And the universal truth is this: that in negotiation, each side is coming to the table to try and establish what is the best I can get them to agree to. And that's true even in the most collaborative of relationships, by the way. You know, I might be coming to negotiate with you. I'm going to be exploring what's the best I can get you to agree to while still preserving the relationship. And you're probably going to be doing the very same. But because of that universal truth, the idea that my first proposal to you is going to be, you know, me revealing the best I can ever give you, that's a nonsense. My first proposal to you is actually going to be me testing you to see the best I can get you to agree to. And we need to remember this point, because when you combine that universal truth with the psychological phenomenon that is anchoring, then we leave ourselves very vulnerable. So what is anchoring? Well, anchoring is essentially the psychological phenomenon by which we become overly influenced by pieces of information that are presented to us before we enter any kind of decision-making process. And anchoring in negotiation is the phenomenon by which we become overly influenced by the first proposal that is put on the table, because our brains anchor to it. And then that first proposal has a disproportionate effect on every move made after that point. Now, the science on anchoring is vast and compelling. There is not a single study, published or otherwise, from the last 58 years now that shows that you gain any advantage by letting them go first. And yet, so many sales courses, so many negotiation courses, and so many influencing courses perpetuate this old and outdated advice: let the other side go first, because then you can hear what they might be willing to give you. And it's simply not true. Now, I'm going to recommend a book that you should read. The book is called Priceless: The Hidden Psychology of Value by William Poundstone. It is a wonderful book, but horrifying. And it goes really into detail on anchoring. But I am also going to provide Christina and the team with a little thought piece for you on this, so you can read more about it. But let me show you this very quick simulation, which basically outlines why anchoring will be affecting you. So let's imagine I've been asked by a client to come to their office and pitch for a project. So they've given me the outline of what they want me to do. I've gone away, I've developed a proposal, and I've priced it up. I've decided I'm going to start by opening ambitiously but credibly, and I'm going to start by asking for £58,000. Now I'm thinking 58, 58, 58. But before I can say that out loud, they say, great to see you, Natalie, and delighted to let you know that we've got a budget for this project of £46,000. Now, right now, whether I like it or not, this is a £46,000 conversation, because right now, that's the only physical, tangible thing that's on the table, and my brain has anchored to it. And I'm probably now thinking of all the reasons why I can't accept it. I will probably then articulate that, and I'll say to them, I'm sorry, I can't do 46. That's way below market. 46 won't cover this. It won't cover that. 46 this, 46, 46, 46. I will probably then ask a question that so many of us ask at this point. We think it's going to help us, but it actually doesn't. I might then say, could you explain where you got 46,000 from? And it's funny because we ask them to explain themselves like they're somehow not going to be able to. But of course they can, and they do. They will then take to the floor and explain all the reasons why 46 is the right number. And at the end of this whole process, which might be quite lengthy, we are still at 46. I've not gone anywhere. We've not moved anywhere. I've not achieved anything. And what we need to be very, very cautious of is that the science tells us very clearly, the more you talk about their proposal, even in the negative, the more likely you are to finish closer to it. And yet, the more you talk about your proposal, the more likely you are to finish closer to that. Best thing I could have done in that situation is just acknowledge their proposal, thank them for it, but then start talking about why my proposal was 58,000. So I might say, look, thank you so much for your proposal, and I'm really grateful to be here today talking to you about this piece of work. However, based on what you said this piece of work was all about, my proposal to you is 58,000, and here are the reasons why. Now, anchoring also displays itself in another way. So let's assume I'm thinking 58, 58. They jump in and they say 46. What also happens is this: before we say anything out loud, our brains start to panic and we think, 46? Why are they saying 46? I thought they'd start at 50 or 52. Like, I can't say 58 now. They're going to think I'm overpriced or unrealistic. What am I going to do? I know what I'll do. And when I do open my mouth, I say, do you know what? I can't do 46, but I can do 50. And I immediately revise down my expectations about what I think is possible in this deal. But that's based purely on what they said to me first. Now, you might be cynical about anchoring, but I bet you've done a version of that before, where you plan to say one thing, but based on what they say first, you adjust slightly. And of course, the sad thing about this example is 46 was just them testing me to see the best they can get me to agree to. They were probably very clear in their head the whole time they could go higher than that. But I'm never going to know that now, because I've already come galloping down, overly influenced by their first proposal to me. Now, to be very clear, I've just given you a numbers example, a pricing example on anchoring, but anchoring applies to anything: deadlines, resources, budgets, governance, personnel, performance, risk. And the trick with anchoring is not that you have to go first every time. The trick with anchoring is to know what to do if you don't go first. And that is, don't become overly influenced by their first proposal. Don't anchor to it and change your whole strategy because of it. Instead, stick to your plan and start re-anchoring if you can. Okay, next up is L for lead. So this is once you're in the negotiation, how do you lead it to a solution that works best? A very simple way of doing this is actually be solution focused. Don't just spend the whole negotiation saying no to their proposals if you disagree with them. You know, I see a lot of people who just go, no, I can't do that. No, that's not going to work. No, no, no. Always use a no as a springboard to what you can do. So rather than just saying, no, that's not going to work, instead you say, do you know what? I'm not going to be able to get to that point, but what I can do is. And hopefully now, given what we've just discussed on anchoring, you can see that what that is actually doing is re-anchoring. And also what it's doing is showing you as someone who is solution focused, creative, ready to solve problems. So always be solution focused. Don't just keep saying what you can't do. Use that as a springboard to say what you can. And watch your language as well. You know, so many of us frame our proposals wrongly. You know, we say things like, I'm looking for, or I'm hoping for, or we say somewhere in the region of, around about. And all we're doing is advertising that we are completely movable. Good negotiators use firm, clear, and concise language. And to make that point, there's a big difference between me coming to the negotiation and saying, hi there, I'm looking for something somewhere in the region of 20,000, and me saying, hi there, my proposal is 20,000 and here are the reasons why. I'm asking for the same thing, but I'm doing it in a very different way, and all the evidence tells us I will get a very different outcome second time around. And then finally, S is for seal the deal. So what this is basically about is, future-proof your deals, get them in writing, get legal to check them over, make sure they're watertight, obviously. But actually what I want to focus on is this: be cautious of the yes that comes too easily. Now, I said this next section was all about how to get to a yes, and it is. But you do need to be very cautious that, you get to the first and easy yes and then you stop. So often in our quest to get a deal, we hear something that feels okay and we say yes to it, or we propose something and they say an immediate yes and we think, oh, thank God, that was easy. Actually, as negotiators, what we want to hear at least once in the negotiation process is a no from them, because we know that anything after that is actually a negotiation. An immediate yes, that's not a negotiation. We need to hear a no so that we then know that anything after that is an exploration of what could be possible. Now, that all sounds very well and good, but the reality is, as human beings, we have a psychological aversion to rejection. We don't like to be told no. It's painful, it's embarrassing, it's frustrating. And I actually believe that how you respond to a no is what defines you as a negotiator. If you're the type of negotiator who is told no and your reaction is to crumble and just go, oh, right, sorry, okay, so what were you thinking then? All you're doing, of course, is then gifting the power to them. What I want you to leave here today with is the mindset of, you know what, they've said no. Fine. Because now that's my invitation to be creative, build rapport, look for solutions, suggest new things. And that is what creates brilliant and resilient negotiators. So remember this: when life shuts a door, open it again. It's a door. That's how they work. And I give this advice to every negotiator I work with, because all negotiation is someone trying to shut various doors on you. And if what you want is behind that door, if what your client needs is behind that door, our job, your job as a negotiator, is to go back and try and open that door one more time if you can. And you do that by asking in a different way, taking someone else with you, being a bit more assertive, being a bit more gentle, whatever you need to do. You try and open that door again at least once. Those are my contact details. Please do drop me a line if you've got anything, any questions about what I've said today. You can get me at natalie@advantageSPRING.com. You can connect with me on Twitter at advspringceo, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.